A lot of time has passed since the initial release of Devil May Cry 4, a little over 8 years to be precise. DMC has missed a lot of shifts in gaming since its last true outing, and while some games have started pushing in some questionable directions, quite a few developers have truly raised the bar and elevated the standards for action games to unprecedented heights. In this video, I'd like to explore some of the developments made by developers like Platinum as well as other teams and delineate what I think would be good to borrow from versus what I think would do the series harm. These two lists are not symmetrical, but regardless, here's what I think Devil May Cry should take from other games, as well as what I think Capcom should avoid taking. And for clarity's sake, when I say take, I don't mean a one-to-one transplant. I'm simply referring to the underlying ideas behind some of these design decisions. For the record, even though I'll be referencing their games quite a bit throughout this piece, I don't want Platinum to act as the core inspiration for Devil May Cry 5. I see Platinum's approach to beat-em-ups and DMC's approach as two radically different things, and if DMC 5 comes out with light attack, heavy attack dial combos and piece of directional inputs, I'm gonna be pissed. So this is a smaller thing, but it's undeniable that Platinum have set a golden standard for how to approach music in action games. Whether it's moments like this, or just a simple removal of vocals to accentuate a shift in a boss fight phase, touches like these outclass a looping boss theme a la Sworn Through Swords, and they can realize a fight from a presentational perspective much better. This isn't really talking about the songs themselves, but rather how they're programmed to respond and correlate with the fights in general. Moving on into the negatives then. Poor treatment of customers has become a black mark on the games industry from the mid-7th generation onward, and microtransactions and full retail releases have become commonplace. Sadly, both the reboot and Devil May Cry 4 Special Edition have downed this particular brand of Kool-Aid, but hey, that's okay. It's never too late to learn from your mistakes and just not repeat them. It was bound to happen eventually that someone at Capcom would have the bright idea of putting optional content behind a paywall. I'm just relieved that it was for something like a special edition instead of an entirely new game. The problem that I have with these things is that optional pieces of content like costumes are better served as rewards for skillful play rather than players with deep pockets. Remember when costumes used to have to be earned? That was just an objectively better system, especially for such a mechanically deep franchise as Devil May Cry, because to earn those costumes you had to spend more time playing the game, and the more time you spend playing the game, the more comfortable and knowledgeable you'll become with the mechanics, and that's the gateway drug to truly stylish play. Instead of trying to milk players for content that should already be on the disc, perhaps an extended, even delayed development cycle of post-launch content would be to Devil May Cry's benefit. I'm talking like Dark Souls or Bloodborne tier DLC, where it's a substantial amount of content that can be developed to complement the state of the vanilla game, as well as the current skill level of your dedicated players. Players get better the more they play. It's a fact that I'm sure we're all well aware of, and in Devil May Cry's case, it doesn't take long for veterans to start unraveling mechanics and learning how to play the game. It can only take a few weeks with a game before Dante Must Die is completely beneath you. Of course, it's a little rough for developers to account for lab monsters putting in tons of time honing execution, but that's where DLC comes in. If the developers design around the advanced skills of advanced players, then suddenly you have a completely new set of applicable challenges to grow with, and that's the benefit of good DLC. If From Software has shown us anything, it's that players are totally cool with going up against insurmountable challenges so long as they're engaging and fair. This is a problem that Devil May Cry has suffered from for a while now. In Devil May Cry 4 and the reboot especially, enemies waver between annoying and boring, with Kratos existing as the only true standout fight where he was challenging without being frustrating or too easily exploited. And sure, you can stun lock him or just distort him infinitely, but at least the entire game plan didn't hinge on grabbing ads and throwing them at a fucking window. The point is, they hit something strong with Kratos and Virgil, and the fundamentals of a straight-up fair duel rest much better for challenge instead of what usually passes for enemy design in 4 in the reboot. And going forward, so many other games have managed to work actual fighting into the combat instead of one-sided combos that Devil May Cry 5 should take notice. Platinum are known for them, and for the most part, set pieces work out just fine within a Platinum game because of how simple and effective the controls are. Because Platinum layouts are generalized and easy to wrap your head around, it's not a huge shock to go from controlling Bayonetta on the ground versus on the back of a rocket in a shmup section, and it's always a fun, smooth ride that doesn't distract much from the regular ground combat. Devil May Cry is a different beast, though. Part of me just feels like taking the general mode of control for a Devil May Cry character and trying to transfer that to a wacky bike race or a plane ride would just be too great of a leap for most to take. Thinking on it more, this wouldn't be a huge deal, but then I think back to things like the Savior fight, and I'm reminded of how Devil May Cry's strengths lie in its character control and straight-up combat, and the more contextual layers and additives you put on that combat, the worse it gets. Can I just say that modding is great? It lets fans contribute content to some of their favorite games, and this is the kind of stuff that keeps games alive long after their dev teams stop giving a shit. Mods exist for all of the PC Devil May Cry titles, but on the whole, they're usually visual changes instead of new movesets, enemies, or mechanics. If you're aware of what gamers have been able to do with games like Skyrim or Minecraft, how do you not look at that and just go, hey, I want that too. Especially for Devil May Cry. Who needs Capcom to make challenging new content when the fans already know where the rest of the community is at skill-wise? Realistically, making modding of this type easier could hinge on the engine used to develop the game. I imagine it will likely be an in-house engine, but assuming this is design philosophy that they're taking seriously, I don't see why an open and accessible game directory should be out of the question. Keep it in the characters' movesets. Get QTEs the fuck out of my beat-em-ups. This is something that everybody seems to be doing nowadays to greater or lesser degrees. For Platinum, it can be a simple execute prompt. For other games, it's an entire boss fight. But in all cases, these canned animations spin against the way Devil May Cry drives. In a series that thrives on expressive control, is it any wonder why button prompts with canned animations run counter to Devil May Cry's fundamentals? Now, in defense of 4, Nero's Buster was a universal mechanic that applied to all enemies. Sure, they had unique animations and properties based on the body type of the demon, but a universal promptless action is a far cry from a singleton button prompt that triggers a little cutscene for massive damage. Also, it's fair to point out that if you're using Nero's Devilbringer, you could also close gaps and even carry enemies along with you to use them as shields. The canned animations were a smaller part of a larger universal moveset. I shouldn't even have to say why, but I'm going to anyway. Learning how to play Devil May Cry is hard. That's not a casual circle jerk, it's the acknowledgement that every good player that has ever touched this franchise has done so through hundreds, if not thousands of hours of experimentation, communication, and most importantly, practice. Up until now, if you wanted to train in Devil May Cry 4, you had two options: use a trainer or restart the mission, and that's a degree of choice that's exclusive to the PC, might I add. If you had any interest in this game at an advanced level and you were a console-only player, then I hope you enjoyed looking at the first room of Mission 12 or the first few stages of Bloody Palace, because that's likely all you were going to see. We're at a point now where Capcom is definitely 110% aware of how dedicated the player base is. Capcom in kind should respond with a real training mode with options for the enemies you train with, and some systems to make executional training and experimentation easier on those who take it seriously. No. Call me old-fashioned, but these things just aren't meant for a stylish beat-em-up. They strip away player control, they crush the pacing, and they ruin replay value. These are effectively the anti-beat-em-up. Walk and talk sections should be avoided like the plague for no other reason than this cannot stack up to actual gameplay in terms of interactivity. This has nothing to do with how I perceive the story or character interactions of Devil May Cry. I personally think that the characters are fantastic, but once again, no line of dialogue is good enough enough to take away my control. Besides, with characters this bombastic, they benefit from cinematic camera angles and pacing in a way that walking down a hallway cannot match. I get the need for a breather every once in a while. Trust me, after playing a 26-minute long continuous fight in Transformers Devastation, I get the need to stop and recuperate, but thankfully there's another way to get that downtime. And no, it's not just walking down hallways. Platforming and beat-em-ups have been unified in some strange ways in the past, but for me, they're just the superior way of going about downtime, bearing in mind that downtime in a beat-em-up is just the absence of real pulse-pounding action. Using some of the established movement abilities to explore an environment for goodies or secret encounters fits way better than gyro blades or dice games. Realistically, everything that I've brought up in the negatives of this video can still exist in Devil May Cry 5 without damaging the rest of the game beyond repair, but moving throughout the 7th and 8th generations, beloved franchises like, well, Devil May Cry have been beaten with the casual stick for no real reason. Devil May Cry exists in a bit of a void where it has everything it needs to stand head and shoulders above the competition. It has a great attitude about player expression and move list design, and all it needs in this regard is an increase of content that adheres to that standard. But if the next Devil May Cry turns into a button-mashing, stinger-style extravaganza, then we'll truly have lost something important then, haven't we? I have little reason to believe that Capcom would turn Devil May Cry into a thoughtless button basher, except, well, And I get shirty about this not as an elitist, but rather as someone who sees the expressive gameplay of Devil May Cry as a peak for what the medium can be. And when you boil the combat down or remove player choice for no reason, then we all lose out on something. So, assuming that Capcom does stay true to what makes Devil May Cry good, where can we go here? As I said, Devil May Cry 3 and 4 have got a great attitude, but 4 especially suffers from a dearth of content variety on all fronts. It only launched with 2 playable characters and failed to really bring either of them up to the variety standard set by Devil May Cry 3. Moreover, it lacked level variety, and it repeated lame boss fights like nobody's business. If I could point to the one thing that Bayonetta has completely outshined Devil May Cry on, it's this right here. Hell, even Transformers Devastation, a licensed game that should have no right being as content-rich as it is, gave me optional fights that challenged me with completely new encounters against enemies that weren't even in the campaign. This is the attitude that Capcom desperately needs to adopt. Who cares if it fits in with the rest of your story missions? If it's a fun fight, weapon, or character, throw it in anyway, and don't save it for the special edition. If Devil May Cry 5 comes out and Nero's a playable character, but there's no Nero boss fight because the plot doesn't demand it, who cares? Do it as an optional boss in a secret mission and then throw some special rewards at the end of that challenge to incentivize players doing that content. Stuff like special items, difficulty modifiers, costumes, guns, devil arms, or even a completely new character? I don't know, Mango. Jumping off of enemies' heads to a countdown timer is a lot less cool than fighting Optimus Prime and Megatron at the same time. I'm just saying. Once again, this will give your player extracurricular stuff to do, and the more time they'll spend doing cool things that they enjoy, the more they understand about the mechanics that they play with. And that's the difference between a dull player and a stylish player. My name is VashTSB, and I'll see you guys soon.